Hi everyone, it's Amina. It's Saturday morning in London and I wanted to do a video on 14 things you can do to improve your relationship with family, friends and colleagues. And I'm focused more on when I work with people through coaching on work and purpose and mission and feeling aligned and alive in what you're doing with through your work. But relationships always come in and they're an integral part of the work we do. And you could say that the way we relate to the world determines how we engage with the world, and that determines the outcomes. It's a really big factor in the outcomes we get. Obviously, there are factors outside our control, but we can control how we relate. So I've divided them into kind of increasing order of mastery. The first ones are kind of straightforward. You'll probably recognize them, and they're easy to implement immediately, I would say. And then the later ones require that you actually dig deeper into what that means, what they mean for you, how they apply. You might have to try and experiment and make some mistakes, get some weird results before you really get a hang of them. So they require a bit more practice, a bit more understanding, and a bit more presence, maybe. So without further ado, thing number one, stop comparing. Stop comparing. It's so rampant, the whole comparison, because it's a survival function. We have to compare ourselves to others in a survival situation to know whether we're stronger or they're stronger. Are they gonna kill us or are we gonna kill them? Are they gonna eat us or are we gonna eat them? That's all. Comparison is pretty much that. Now that's not to say that looking at others and learning from them or being inspired by what they're doing or noticing how you react to that person or what they're doing or what they represent isn't going to give you useful information or motivation to follow your own path. What I'm talking about here by saying stop comparing is the kind of straight, blunt comparison, comparing apples with oranges, like, oh, they've got this and I don't have it, or isn't it awful? So when you're talking to someone, notice if you start comparing yourself that way and cut that immediately. Don't bother following it, cut it. You can, if you have an interesting insight from comparing yourself to someone, it will stay with you and you can come back to it later. But if you stay in the unhealthy comparison, it's gonna reduce the quality of your communication. Okay. Number two, judging. Stop judging. And it's kind of relating to comparing, because when you're comparing, you're making a judgment. So this is a slightly more subtle form. So judging, stop judging is stop making interpretations and evaluations of the person in front of you, of what they're saying, of what you're saying, or how you reacted to it. So stop judging is the idea that you're in the conversation, you're not interpreting the conversation as you're having the conversation. Okay, so that's number two, stop judging. Hi, Bruno. Number three, stop planning your response. If you're talking to someone, listen while they're talking, tune into what you feel when there's a pause, and then respond from there. It might require what I'm going to talk about later, but see if you can practice not planning your response while the person is talking. Just listen, and when they're done, see what comes up and speak from there. Let go of any premeditated response, because you'll be responding to something they said early in the conversation, right? If you started planning your response before they finished talking. So it's not going to be a real response. You're like, oh, I know what they mean. I know what they're talking about. Oh, I know this already. Oh, I wish they just shut up so I can start talking. That's going to really reduce the quality of your connection with that person. So number three is stop planning your response. Notice when you start doing that and stop. Come back to what the person is saying. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, whether you're watching now or watching later. So number four, breathe. if you do nothing else in a conversation and you're thinking, I really want this conversation to go well, I want to connect with this person, I want to speak my truth, I want to speak honestly, just breathe. Focus on your breathing, listen to what they're saying, come back to your breathing, listen to what they're saying. It's going to be a much nicer, much gentler experience and ultimately more fruitful. Now, this requires that you let go of control a little bit, because you're not trying to control, you're just being in the moment. And it can be scary, but that's okay. Which brings us to principle number 5, and that's get comfortable with silence. Get comfortable with silence. So going back over what I've already mentioned, you can imagine that, yeah, silence is going to become more important in your conversations if you're trying to improve the quality of the conversation and therefore the connection and the outcomes. So most people are uncomfortable with silence. They feel they have to fill the space. And they will rather say something they don't really mean, or they don't want to say, or say something that maybe a little rude or clumsy, than be in the silence. So see if you can practice that. Leaving a bit more space, leaving a few more gaps in the conversation. You can use your breath, take a breath. It's not completely silent since you're doing something, you're taking a breath. And then that brings us to principle number 6, which is get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Tim Ferriss, who you may know from the 4-Hour Workweek, I've never read the book, but I kind of respect that he's created something from scratch and influenced a lot of people. So he says that your success is proportional to the number of difficult conversations you're willing to have. And if you think about it, if you want to have a real conversation, that involves you're saying really what's going on for you, but also really hearing what's going on for another person, which may be uncomfortable. They may be saying something that has an impact on you that creates guilt or creates anger or something, an uncomfortable emotion. And if you try to cut it, that cuts the process. Being with that discomfort and breathing through it, essentially not reacting to the discomfort as a sort of survival kind of response, will improve the quality of the conversation. And it will allow you to have deeper relationships and more honest and therefore fruitful conversations. Number 7, facts, not fiction. Or another way of putting that is, it's kind of coming back to the judgment thing. Focus on observations. If you're, especially if you're in a slightly sensitive conversation, don't go to interpretations as a default mode. Watch out for anything that's an interpretation on your part that you're speaking as fact. Facts are things that you can generally agree kind of happened in the physical world, like, this person entered the room, or this event finished at this time. Those are facts that you can generally agree on. They're not interpretations. Obviously, you can argue, well, what's reality and is there interpretations? But that's not what I'm talking about. Just talk about basic sort of materialist worldview. There are things that are out there that are facts. Whereas your interpretation is subjective. It's like the person entered the room and they were arrogant. Right? That's a judgment. You interpreted their behavior. They arrived late and that they're arrogant. So that's your interpretation, which becomes, in this case, it's a very clear judgment. That starts to disconnect. It starts to bring a bit more aggression, a bit more animal and survivalist, reactive energy into the conversation. And then people can start to bounce off each other. Like, yeah, this, that, and the other. And then it gets all negative and... well, you know the kind of conversation I'm talking about. So if that's happening, focus on, try to come back to observations and facts that people can agree on rather than your interpretation of the facts. So now we're getting to the slightly more advanced territory. Number 8, articulate your deeper need. Okay, this requires another skill, which is to be able to identify your needs. Most of us are not taught how to do that. We're just taught to do what we're supposed to do. And maybe we're taught to address our physical needs, like, oh, need to eat, need to sleep, need to drink, need to buy clothes. But we're not taught other needs like, oh, we have a need for belonging. We have a need to be heard. We have a need to be understood. We have a need to feel safe, not just physically, but emotionally, psychologically. And these are the deeper needs that actually drive our behavior that we're unaware of, and that can throw us off course or create misunderstandings. Because let's say you're trying to meet a need for connections. Like, you want your partner or your friend or your boss or whatever to pay you some attention and acknowledge something you did. Like, I did something really good, or I did a nice thing for them. I really feel I want that to be seen. I want to be acknowledged. But it's really hard. We're not told that's okay to ask for acknowledgement like that. To say, I did this thing and I really love it if you would say something nice about it, or tell me how you enjoyed it, or tell me that you appreciate it. I'd really love to hear that. You're not forcing them. You're just saying, I would really love it. It would make me feel really good if you would do that. But instead, we'd rather go into the more basic communication errors, which are we start blaming. We start judging the other person. We start accusing them of being selfish or heartless or whatever, insensitive, or they don't love us. Right? We have all these rules for how we get to feel loved, and we don't tell people, we just expect them to know. There's a bit of a gender component to that. I'm sure some of you will have thought about that. So articulate your deeper need and watch out for blaming. So you have a need, you take responsibility for that as an adult and express it to the person and ask them to help you meet that need and explain to them, be specific. I would feel great if X happened. It would be really great. Would you be willing to do that? Rather than the blame, which is blaming the other person or blaming yourself. Okay, and then the same for the converse. Listen to the other person's need or deeper need. So they may be saying they may be activated. So we're assuming you may be the more conscious person interested in personal development. They may come to you and they be completely in a reactive state, angry at you, and they may be blaming you for something, right? So they haven't listened to these 14 principles, so they don't know. So they're just blaming you and telling you how awful you are for not doing X, Y, or Z. So try and do the reverse. Listen for the deeper need. So just using the same example, maybe they need some of your attention. Maybe they're saying, I really need some reassurance. I really need some affection. I really need some appreciation. And rather than reacting to the accusation, and then you get into this reactive game, which is unsatisfying and doesn't lead anywhere, it just creates suffering and pain and can damage relationships. See if you can help them meet. Be the wiser, kinder, more compassionate person, and see if you can help them meet that need. And that may just be listening to their complaint without reacting to it. Obviously, you have to look after yourself as well, but let's say you can see they're angry, but it's not affecting you that badly. You're just like, oh, they're really angry. Then maybe you can just allow them to express it and reflect it back. Just say, oh, I see it looks like you're really, really upset, or you're really angry, or you're really annoyed with me, or you be as generous as you can. Say you think I'm a jerk, right? Or I don't know. You can play with this endlessly. And that should help to restore a sense of connection. If you've hit their need, they're going to calm down immediately. It's like magic. So that was listen for the deeper need. Okay, number 10, which is related, it's turning complaints into requests. So when there's a complaint situation where the person is complaining, right? We all know what complaining is. Rather than engaging in the superficial chatter, and this is kind of a more specific case of the previous descriptive principle, listen to what they're really asking for. What are they really asking you for? Are they asking you to be on time, right? Or are they asking you to slow down? when you're talking to them? Are they asking you for more of your attention? Are they asking you for, I don't know, I can't think of anything specific other than someone who's complaining and really listening to hear what they need underneath. And it may not even be related to you. They may have just had a bad day and you happen to be in that spot and they just start having a rant. So, and if you see it that way, it won't even affect you because you're like, this has got nothing to do with me. This person's just in pain. And they're having a really bad day and they're really having a hard time. So what's the request? Maybe they just need someone to give them a hug. I don't know. Or maybe they need someone to tell them, back down. Sometimes you need to be a little bit firm to help people wake up, especially if it's starting to feel aggressive towards you. All right, so number 11, do not use threats lightly. Don't use threats lightly because they can cause irreversible damage to relationships. A threat should only be used if a request that's been made more than once hasn't worked. And if it should only be used if you mean it, because if you use threats without actually following through or taking the action you're threatening, then the person stops taking you seriously because they don't believe you're going to take action on it. And then you just become more frustrated and you end up in a long, unhealthy dynamic, potentially. So do not use threats lightly. Those are the last resort. Once you've really done all these, you've taken all these other steps to improve the communication and improve the relationship. All right, so master level. It's just arbitrary, but essentially the idea is that some of them require more practice, they require more presence, and they require a bit more understanding and just self-understanding. All right, so number 12, listen with your whole body. We all know the figure of 93% of communication is nonverbal. So that's the result of research. I think it was Maharabian who did it. And but yet we focus only on the concepts and on the rational thinking. That's what we're constantly doing. We're kind of listening to something conceptually, intellectually, and we're turning it over in our heads and coming up with a rational response. But we're not paying attention to all the other stuff, including the deeper needs. And one way to get to those deeper needs is to watch, is to listen with your whole body. So your eyes, your ears, your maybe even your smell, a composite of all these things is saying you're listening with your heart, because you're kind of sensing into the situation. You're kind of hearing, you're paying attention to the cues, to the signals, even the tone and the voice. So a person may be saying something completely banal or even nice, but their body language is really tense. So that's incongruence. If you sense an incongruence, then obviously what they're saying is not matching to what is really true for them. And that's very important in terms of improving your communication and improving relationships and improving the outcomes in your work, in your relationships. A classic one would be someone who says, "I'm fine," when they're not. So you have a choice then to say, yeah, well, they said they're fine, so that's fine, I'm just going to get on with my day. Or if it's someone you care about, then you might want to say, you're saying you're fine, but I feel like maybe you're not. Is there something you want to talk about? And see how that goes. But this takes practice, okay? So if it goes wrong the first time, that's completely okay. Number 13, observe, don't absorb. So if you're a sensitive person, you will feel people's emotions a lot. You'll feel your own emotions quite intensely. And that can make life uncomfortable for you because you're just feeling more of life all the time. You're feeling people, you're feeling situations, you're feeling your own experience, and it's all, so then you end up avoiding people, you end up avoiding things, you end up kind of trying to isolate yourself to calm some of that intensity down. And that's okay, because we all need to feel calm and relaxed And we also need to live. We also need to be out there in the world and do our thing, right? You can't hide under a rock just so you don't feel the intensity of life. So I would say it's a common misconception to say that to be able to be in relationship with someone, you need to feel their feelings. You know, that's kind of a whole empathy argument. I would go more with the compassion argument, which is you can have a friendly attitude, a friendly, caring attitude towards people, and you don't need to feel their feelings to engage with them in a beautiful, connected way that creates more love and more beauty in the world. So you don't have to actually feel other people's feelings. We have a function that can do that in our brain. We can. Some people think it's through mirror neurons, but nobody really knows. We can feel other people's feelings, but you don't have to, because that's quite tiring and it uses up your energy. If you're having to digest feelings all the time, or in other words, your physiology is taken up with processing the feelings. You're feeling the feeling and then you have to come back to neutral. You're feeling the feeling and you have to come back. That takes energy and that can be quite tiring. And if you're working in a helping profession, then that's going to happen a lot because you're around a lot of people who need help, who may be suffering, and you're helping them. And then the more tired and less present you become, the more that is gonna happen, because you're not noticing when you're starting to feel things and taking steps to calm down. So observe what's going on, listen with your whole body, but don't necessarily allow the feeling to take root. Maybe you can feel a bit of it, but don't allow it to expand and take you up, right? And this is very much mindfulness work, and it takes practice to notice the small blips in your experience, in how you're sensing things. So if you're not meditating, if you're not doing any mindfulness work, that would be my number one tip. Don't forget all of this other stuff. Just do some mindfulness stuff, do some meditation, learn to focus on the breath, learn to focus on one thing at a time. Let go of any interpretation from your mind. Okay, final one, balance connection with facts. So again, this takes skill because it's more of a dynamic moment-to-moment thing, right? It's not like call and response, stimulus response. This happens, then I do this. This happens. You're constantly in the moment, gauging and adjusting in a much more fluid way rather than linear. So yeah. You might have a preference, like maybe think about, do you prefer facts or do you prefer connection? Do you prefer to tell people how it is and you don't care what they think? Or are you more about, oh, I don't like confrontation, I just want to make sure this goes all right and this person's happy and that makes me happy and so everybody's happy and the world is happy. It's like caricatures of the extremes. And each situation is going to require, really, if you're applying wisdom rather than just acting from habit and saying, this is who I am and this is how it is. If you're acting from a place of wisdom where you're doing what's required based on what's happening in the moment. And you're always evolving and growing as you experience more of these situations and more of life. That's really ultimate liberation. You're not acting from habit or conditioning, you're acting from sensing in the moment. And responding from a creative space, not from a habitual conditioned space. So balance connection with facts. Decide, are you more of the, I'm just going to tell it how it is, I don't care how people feel, or are you more of the, I don't like confrontation, I just want to, make sure everything goes well. And decide in the situation, is this situation more appropriate for a calming and repairing and reconnecting, in which case you're not going to say, no, that didn't happen. What are you talking about? I've got proof that what you're saying is wrong. It's a question of timing, really, if you want to sum this one up. Time your responses well. So there may be a time for facts where it's like, I don't agree with what you're saying. The way I experience this is this way. And it's very important if you're involved in what you might call narcissistic situations or relationships where people are manipulative, because they will try and manipulate the facts and make you believe, or they want you to believe, that their reality is the reality and that you're just crazy. It's called gaslighting. So at that point, forget about the connection. You need to reconnect to reality. And reality the way you're experiencing it, and trust that what you're experiencing is true. Obviously, there are a lot of different factors coming in. This is a more advanced sort of stuff. But if you feel you're in a manipulative situation, forget connection, focus on facts. And we can blind ourselves, right? Going back to the narcissistic situation, the narcissist requires a codependent to participate in the dance. So, I don't know, let's take a dating situation where a guy is a narcissist and the woman is like codependent. So the guy is saying that he doesn't care about her, that he, and this can be the other way around, by the way. It could be a woman who's a narcissist and a man who's codependent. But let's say there's the narcissistic person who's like, I don't care about you, I just care about myself. They've proven repeatedly that they do not respect you, they do not care about your feelings. They are only interested in themselves and what they want and what they need, and they will use you and anybody else to get what they want. That's just how they've evolved. They don't necessarily know it's evil or that it's harmful. Anyway, but that's another conversation. And then the other person, the codependent, is they're like, yeah, you're right. Your needs are more important than my needs, because I am selfish. You're right. I'm selfish for wanting to be able to spend time with you, or for you to show up on time when you say you're going to show up on time, or to not beat me up. I'm terrible for not wanting you to beat me up. My God, I deserve to be beaten up. Please beat me up. So that's obviously a terrible, terrible, terrible situation, and it does happen, unfortunately. But this is where at that point, the codependent needs to forget about connection, because they're putting connection before truth, and that is harming them. They're putting connection before truth, and that is harming them. And they're just desperate for the connection. They're desperate for the connection. Yeah, I'm getting a bit sad, because it is a sad thing that does happen. Just to reassure you, it's not happening in my life right now. But yeah, and that was just a long illustration of this point, that there's a time for truth to say, this is not what's happening, I don't agree, this is how I experienced it, and I believe that this is the truth. And there's a time to say, it's okay, that thing doesn't really matter. I really care about this person, I love this person, I just want to have a nice time with them. It's okay if, they got the year of the election wrong. No, I'm not going to make a big deal out of it, just so I can feel clever. Okay, so those are the 14 principles. I'm going to put them, I'm going to post them so you can just read them if you want. And I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions or comments or anything you want to share, please do so, and I will try and reply. Otherwise, I wish you a wonderful weekend. Be kind to yourselves, be kind to others, and see you soon. Bye-bye.